Step out of the vehicle now, or I will make you step out. Officer Ryan Mitchell snapped at a calm black woman during a routine traffic stop, completely unaware that the woman he was ordering around was a United States Army colonel who outranked his authority in ways he could not even comprehend. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The late afternoon sun stretched across the quiet suburban road, casting long shadows over neatly lined trees and parked cars. The hum of distant traffic blended with the occasional rustle of wind through leaves, creating a calm, almost rhythmic atmosphere that felt untouched by urgency. Colonel Denise Walker drove steadily down the road, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, her posture upright, her movements controlled. She wore a simple blouse, understated and professional, her appearance blending seamlessly into the ordinary world around her. Nothing about her demanded attention. Nothing suggested the weight of command she carried beyond that moment. Her eyes remained focused ahead, observant, taking in the road, the surroundings, the small details that most would overlook. The environment was peaceful, predictable. Then, without warning, flashing red and blue lights cut through the calm, reflecting sharply in her rearview mirror. The sudden intrusion shifted the entire atmosphere. Denise did not react with alarm. She glanced at the mirror once, then calmly signaled and pulled over to the side of the road with precise control, bringing the vehicle to a smooth stop. The engine idled quietly as she placed both hands visibly on the steering wheel, her posture unchanged, her breathing steady. Behind her, the patrol car stopped at an angle, its lights still flashing, casting rhythmic bursts of color across the pavement and nearby houses. The driver's side door opened abruptly. Officer Ryan Mitchell stepped out with immediate purpose, his posture rigid, his expression already set with a kind of certainty that did not come from understanding, but assumption. His partner, Officer Jake Sullivan, followed more slowly, his gaze scanning the area with a quieter awareness. Mitchell did not pause. He walked directly toward the driver's side window, his boots striking the pavement with sharp, deliberate steps. The distance between them closed quickly. He stopped beside the car, his presence immediate, his tone already elevated before a single question had been asked. Denise lowered the window smoothly, her movements calm, her gaze steady as she looked up at him. "Good afternoon, officer," she said, her voice even, respectful, but not submissive. Mitchell did not return the tone. "License and registration," he said sharply, his words clipped, his attention fixed, as if the situation had already been decided. The request was standard. The tone was not. Denise held his gaze for a brief moment, then nodded once. "May I ask the reason for the stop?" she replied calmly. The question was simple, reasonable, but it shifted something immediately. Mitchell's expression tightened. The pause that followed was brief, but noticeable. And in that moment, as the quiet road held its breath, the balance of the situation began to change, not because of resistance, but because of the calm precision of a woman who understood exactly where she stood, even if he did not. The brief pause that followed Denise Walker's question lingered just long enough to expose the imbalance beneath Officer Ryan Mitchell's authority. His expression tightened, his jaw setting as if the question itself had challenged something he was not used to having challenged. "You were speeding," he said quickly, though the words came out with less certainty than his tone suggested. Denise's gaze remained steady, her posture unchanged, her hands still resting calmly on the steering wheel. "Do you have the recorded speed?" she asked. The question was precise, measured, and it landed with a quiet weight that did not match the simplicity of the words. Mitchell exhaled sharply, irritation flickering across his face. "I do not need to debate this with you," he replied, his voice rising slightly. "I asked for your license and registration." The emphasis shifted, not toward clarity, but control. Denise nodded once, her movements unhurried as she reached slowly toward her bag, careful, deliberate, ensuring her actions were visible. The sound of her fingers brushing against the leather seemed louder than it should have been in the stillness of the moment. Mitchell's hand hovered near his belt as she moved, his posture tightening, his attention fixed on every motion. Behind him, Officer Jake Sullivan watched closely, his eyes moving between Denise's hands and Mitchell's stance, his hesitation growing more noticeable. Denise retrieved her documents and held them out calmly. "Here you are," she said. Mitchell took them with a quick, sharp motion, his fingers brushing against hers just long enough to assert dominance rather than complete a transaction. He glanced down briefly, then back at her, his eyes narrowing as if searching for something that justified his tone. "Step out of the vehicle," he said abruptly. The command cut through the air, unnecessary and immediate. Denise did not move right away. She looked at him, her expression composed, her voice steady. "Is there a reason for that?" she asked. The question was calm, reasonable, but it disrupted the rhythm he was trying to enforce. Mitchell's expression hardened instantly. "Because I said so," he replied, his voice louder now, edged with impatience. "You're not in a position to question me." The words drew attention. A car passing slowly reduced speed, the driver's head turning slightly toward the flashing lights. The environment, once quiet, now held a subtle tension that had not been there before. Denise remained seated, her posture upright, her composure unbroken. "I am complying," she said. "I provided what you asked for." Mitchell took a step closer, his presence pressing against the boundary of the open window. "You are not cooperating," he snapped. "You are being difficult." The accusation was not grounded in action. It was rooted in perception. Sullivan shifted again, his voice low. "Ryan, we could just run her information first," he suggested. Mitchell did not turn. "No," he said flatly. "She steps out now." The decision had already been made. Denise held his gaze for a brief moment longer, then slowly released her seatbelt. The quiet click of the latch echoed more than expected, marking the moment with subtle finality. She opened the door carefully and stepped out, her movements controlled, her posture unchanged. Standing now on the side of the road, framed by flashing lights and quiet observation, she remained calm, composed, and grounded in something far deeper than the authority being projected at her. And as Mitchell stepped closer, his tone sharpening, his control tightening, it became clear that the situation was no longer about a traffic stop, but about how far he was willing to push without understanding who stood in front of him. The air along the roadside had shifted completely now, no longer carrying the calm rhythm of a routine stop, but something sharper, more deliberate. Officer Ryan Mitchell stepped closer, his presence pressing into Denise Walker's space with increasing intensity, his posture rigid, his authority no longer measured but imposed. "Turn around," he said abruptly, his voice cutting through the quiet. The command came fast, unnecessary, and unmistakably escalated. Denise did not move immediately. She stood facing him, her posture upright, her expression calm, her gaze steady in a way that did not challenge, but did not yield. "On what grounds?" she asked. The question was simple, precise, and it landed with a weight that did not match its volume. Mitchell's jaw tightened. "You are not following instructions," he snapped. "That is enough." The justification was thin, but he pressed forward anyway. Behind him, Officer Jake Sullivan stepped closer, his voice low but urgent. "Ryan, we have not run her information yet," he said. Mitchell did not look at him. "We do not need to," he replied sharply. "I can see what this is." The certainty in his tone stood in contrast to the absence of evidence. Denise held his gaze for a brief moment, then slowly turned, not out of submission, but control. Her movements were deliberate, measured, each step grounded in composure. The quiet click of her heels against the pavement seemed louder now, amplified by the silence of those watching. Mitchell moved behind her quickly, his hand reaching for her wrist. His grip was firm, unnecessary, and immediate. The contact shifted the moment again. A car passing slowed further. A figure on the sidewalk stopped completely, their attention fixed. Denise's arm moved slightly with the force, but she did not resist. She did not pull away. She simply allowed the motion, her posture still upright, her balance steady. You are escalating without cause, she said calmly. The statement landed cleanly, structured, undeniable. Mitchell tightened his grip, his control now visible, physical. No, he replied. I am handling the situation. The distinction mattered to him, even if it did not hold. Without warning, he pulled her arm further behind her back, positioning her with a sharp, practiced motion. The metallic sound of handcuffs being drawn from his belt cut through the air, the sound sharp and unmistakable. Sullivan stepped forward again, his hesitation gone. Ryan, stop, he said. This is not justified. Mitchell ignored him completely. The first cuff snapped closed with a distinct click. The sound echoed across the quiet road, louder than expected, heavier than it should have been. Denise's wrists were secured. The act was complete. Mitchell stepped back slightly, his chest rising as if the action itself had restored order. There, he said, his voice firm, though thinner now. Now we are done talking. Denise turned her head slightly, her gaze lifting just enough to meet his. Her expression remained unchanged, her composure intact. You have just made a decision you cannot reverse, she said quietly. The words settled into the silence with unmistakable weight. Mitchell let out a short breath, dismissive, though something beneath it had shifted. We will see about that, he replied. But the certainty was no longer absolute. And, as the flashing lights continued to pulse against the pavement, reflecting across the stillness of the scene, it became clear that what he believed was control had already begun to unravel, quietly, precisely, and completely beyond his reach. The words, "we will see about that," lingered in the air, but they no longer carried the same certainty. The flashing lights from the patrol car continued to pulse against the pavement, casting sharp bursts of red and blue across Denise Walker's composed figure, her hands restrained behind her back, her posture still upright, still controlled. Officer Ryan Mitchell stood in front of her, adjusting his stance as if trying to regain control of something that had already begun to slip. Start walking, he ordered, gesturing toward the rear of the patrol car. His tone was firm, but thinner now, strained beneath the surface. Denise did not move immediately. She stood still for a moment, her gaze steady, her breathing even, as if measuring the space around her rather than reacting to it. You are proceeding without cause, she said calmly. The statement was not raised. It did not need to be. It settled into the moment with quiet precision. Mitchell exhaled sharply, his patience thinning again, though the edge of it had changed. I already told you, he snapped. You are not in a position to question anything. Without waiting for a response, he stepped forward and placed a firm hand against her upper arm, guiding her toward the vehicle with unnecessary force. The movement was controlled, but aggressive enough to draw another shift from the surrounding environment. A car slowed further down the road. A figure on the sidewalk raised a phone higher, capturing the moment more clearly now. Officer Jake Sullivan moved closer, his voice low, urgent. Ryan, we need to slow this down, he said. We still have not verified anything. Mitchell did not look at him. We are past that, he replied flatly. She is detained. Denise allowed the movement, her steps measured despite the restraint, her posture unchanged. Each step toward the patrol car felt deliberate, not because of resistance, but because of control. She stopped just short of the open door, turning her head slightly to face Mitchell again. This is your last opportunity to correct this, she said. The words were calm, but carried a weight that cut through everything else. Mitchell paused, just briefly. His grip tightened slightly, as if to anchor himself in the moment. Then he shook his head, dismissing it entirely. No, he said, his voice louder now, forcing certainty back into place. This is already done. The dismissal was immediate, but lacked the stability it once held. Denise held his gaze, unblinking. Then you understand what follows, she said quietly. The statement did not sound like a warning. It sounded like inevitability. Mitchell let out a short laugh, though it came out sharper than before. Yeah, he replied. I understand exactly how this works. He reached for the car door, pulling it wider, his hand motioning firmly. Get in. Denise did not resist. She turned and stepped toward the vehicle, her movements controlled, her composure intact. The door remained open, the space between them now filled with something heavier than authority, something waiting. And as Mitchell stood there, convinced he had completed the situation, it became clear that he had not ended anything at all. He had simply moved beyond the last moment where he could have stopped, stepping fully into a decision whose consequences were already beginning to unfold, just beyond his understanding. The open door of the patrol car framed the moment like a final decision waiting to be sealed. Officer Ryan Mitchell stood just to the side, one hand still on the edge of the door, the other hovering near Denise Walker as if ready to force compliance again, if necessary. The flashing lights continued their steady pulse, reflecting off the vehicle's surface and casting shifting shadows across the road. Denise paused just before entering, her posture upright, her presence calm, her composure unbroken. For a brief second, everything seemed suspended. The movement of passing cars slowed, the distant sounds of the street faded, and the focus narrowed entirely too. The space between them. "Move," Mitchell said again, his voice sharper now, the strain beneath it more visible. Denise stepped forward slightly, her movement controlled, deliberate, her balance steady despite the restraints. She placed one foot inside the vehicle, then stopped again, turning her head just enough to look back at him. "You are still making this worse," she said quietly. The words did not rise. They did not push. They simply settled. Mitchell exhaled sharply, frustration breaking through more openly now. "No," he replied, his voice tight. "I am finishing it." The repetition sounded forced, as if he needed to hear it himself. Without warning, he placed a firm hand against her shoulder again, applying pressure to guide her fully into the seat. The movement was controlled, but aggressive enough to shift the moment further into something undeniable. The reaction from the surroundings was immediate. A car slowed to a near stop. A voice from across the street called out, "Hey, that is not right." Another phone lifted higher, capturing the angle more clearly. Officer Jake Sullivan stepped forward again, closer than before, his voice low but urgent. "Ryan, this is not going to hold up," he said. Mitchell did not respond. He leaned in slightly, his grip tightening just enough to complete the motion, pushing Denise fully into the back seat. She did not resist. She did not brace. She simply allowed it, her composure intact, her presence unchanged. Once she was seated, Mitchell stepped back and reached for the door, pulling it halfway, closed before pausing. Denise looked up at him from inside the vehicle, her gaze steady, her expression calm. "You are documenting this," she said. Mitchell frowned slightly, caught for a fraction of a second between irritation and something else he could not name. "Yeah," he replied, dismissive. "That is the point." Denise held his gaze. "Then be certain you understand what you are documenting," she said. The words lingered longer than expected. He hesitated, just briefly. Then he shook it off, pulling the door fully shut with a sharp motion. The sound echoed against the quiet street, louder than it should have been. Mitchell stepped back, adjusting his stance, his breathing uneven for just a moment before he forced it steady again. To him, the situation was complete, contained, finished. But inside the vehicle, Denise Walker remained exactly as she had been from the beginning, calm, composed, and quietly aware that nothing about this moment was over, that every action taken had already moved beyond his control, and that what followed would not be decided by him at all. The patrol car door closed with a sharp, final sound, sealing the moment in a way that felt heavier than the act itself. Inside, Denise Walker sat upright, her hands still restrained behind her, her posture steady, her gaze forward. Outside, Officer Ryan Mitchell took a step back, adjusting his stance as if resetting the scene, his breathing uneven for a brief second before he forced it back under control. The flashing lights continued their rhythm, casting pulses of color across the pavement and the side of the vehicle. He reached for his radio again, pressing the button with deliberate force. "Dispatch, I am transporting," he said, his voice controlled, clipped, final. The response crackled faintly, confirming what he believed was already complete. He clipped the radio back into place, then turned toward the car, his expression tightening as he approached the rear door. For a moment, he stood there, looking through the glass at Denise. She did not move. She did not shift. She simply met his gaze, her composure unchanged. "You should have just cooperated," he said, his voice lower now, less forceful, as if trying to justify the outcome to himself. Denise did not respond immediately. She let the silence settle, let the weight of the moment remain exactly where it was. Then calmly, she spoke. "Officer Mitchell," she said, her voice steady, precise. He paused. Not fully. Just enough. "What?" he replied, his tone sharper than necessary, though something beneath it had shifted. Denise held his gaze through the glass. "You still have a moment to stop this," she said. The words were quiet, measured, but they carried weight. Mitchell let out a short laugh, shaking his head as he stepped closer to the door. "Stop what?" he replied. "This is already done." Denise's expression did not change. "No," she said. "What you have done is already recorded. What you do next determines how far this goes." The distinction lingered, heavier now, more deliberate. Officer Jake Sullivan stood a few steps away, his posture rigid, his hesitation now fully visible. "Ryan, we need to slow down," he said quietly. Mitchell did not look at him. "No," he replied flatly. "We are finishing this." He reached for the door handle, his hand tightening around it, his decision fully committed. Denise's voice came once more, calm, unwavering. "You're about to involve systems you do not control," she said. Mitchell paused for a fraction of a second, just enough to register the words. Then he scoffed, dismissing them completely. "You think I'm worried about that?" he said, his tone rising again, forcing certainty back into place. "I know exactly how this works." Denise held his gaze, unblinking. "No," she replied quietly. "You do not." The words settled into the silence with finality. Mitchell did not respond. He pulled the door open again, his movements sharp, decisive, as if the action itself would end the conversation. But as he stood there, unaware that he had just dismissed the last opportunity to step back, the air shifted, not visibly, not loudly, but unmistakably. Because what came next was no longer a possibility. It was already in motion, just beyond his reach, waiting to arrive. The air shifted before the sound arrived. It was subtle at first, a low, distant hum that did not belong to the quiet rhythm of the suburban road. Officer Ryan Mitchell's hand tightened on the open car door as he paused, just for a fraction of a second, his attention pulled towards something he could not yet see. Then the sound grew louder. Engines, multiple, controlled, approaching with purpose. Denise Walker did not move. She sat inside the vehicle, her posture upright, her gaze steady, as if she had been expecting this exact moment. The first black SUV turned onto the road without hesitation, followed by another, then a third. They did not slow until they reached the scene. Doors opened almost in unison. Figures stepped out, disciplined, precise, their movements coordinated in a way that immediately shifted the entire atmosphere. Officer Jake Sullivan took a step back instinctively, his posture straightening, recognition flickering across his face. "Ryan," he said quietly, but Mitchell did not respond. He was staring. The certainty he had held on a moment earlier was gone, replaced by something far less stable. One of the officers approached, her posture commanding, her expression controlled. Military Police Captain Laura Briggs. Her gaze moved past Mitchell and landed directly on Denise. The shift was immediate. "Ma'am," she said, her tone respectful, precise. "Colonel." The words settled into the air like a final verdict. Mitchell's breath caught. His grip on the door loosened completely, his hand dropping to his side as the meaning struggled to take hold. "What?" he muttered, his voice unsteady, the word barely forming. Denise turned her head slightly, meeting Captain Briggs's gaze. Her composure had not changed. It did not need to. "At ease," she said calmly. The authority in her voice did not rise. It did not demand. It simply existed. Captain Briggs nodded once, then turned to Mitchell, her expression tightening, her presence sharpening. "Remove the restraints," she said. The command was immediate, absolute. Mitchell did not move. For a second he stood frozen, his mind catching up to what had already happened, to what it meant. I did not know, he said, the words slipping out unevenly. Denise's voice came, calm and unwavering. You were told to verify. The distinction struck deeper than anything else. Sullivan stepped closer, his voice low but firm now. Ryan, do it. That broke the moment. Mitchell moved quickly, his hands fumbling slightly as he reached for the cuffs, the metal slipping before finally releasing with a sharp click. The sound echoed across the road, louder than it should have been. Denise stepped out of the vehicle, her movements controlled, her posture still upright, her presence unchanged. She adjusted her sleeve with a smooth, deliberate motion, reclaiming the space without effort. Captain Briggs remained still, her attention fixed on Mitchell. You detained a United States Army colonel, she said quietly. The statement did not need emphasis. It carried its own weight. Mitchell's shoulders dropped, his posture collapsing under the realization. The authority he had relied on moments ago was gone, completely, and standing in front of him, exactly where she had been from the beginning, Denise Walker remained calm, composed, and unmistakably beyond his reach, as the full consequence of his actions settled in with a finality he could no longer escape. The words unmistakably beyond his reach had barely settled when the shift in authority became absolute. Military Police Captain Laura Briggs did not raise her voice, yet the command in her presence was unmistakable. Step away from the scene, she said, her tone controlled, directed at Officer Ryan Mitchell. This time, there was no hesitation. Mitchell stepped back immediately, his movements unsteady, his posture no longer rigid, but collapsing under the weight of what he now understood. The flashing lights that had once marked his authority now felt distant, irrelevant. Captain Briggs turned slightly, addressing the military personnel behind her. Secure him, she said. The instruction was simple, final. 2 military police officers moved forward with precise coordination, their hands firm but controlled as they guided Mitchell's arms behind his back. The cold metallic click of restraints echoed across the roadside, sharp and unmistakable. The same sound he had used minutes earlier now defined him. Mitchell's breath caught, his eyes lowering as the realization deepened, his voice barely holding together. I made a mistake, he said. The words were small, almost lost in the open air. Captain Briggs did not respond immediately. She let the silence settle, allowing the weight of his own admission to stand on its own. You bypassed procedure, she said finally. You escalated without cause, and you detained a superior officer. Each point was delivered with calm precision, dismantling what little remained of his authority. Officer Jake Sullivan stood off to the side, silent, his posture straight, but his expression heavy with understanding. The line he had seen forming had now fully broken. Denise Walker remained still, her presence unchanged, her composure intact. She did not step forward. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Captain Briggs turned back to her, her tone shifting immediately. Colonel, she said respectfully, this will be handled at command level. Denise gave a small nod, her gaze steady, her voice calm. It will be, she replied. The certainty in her tone left no room for doubt. Mitchell's shoulders dropped further, the weight of consequence settling into something permanent. The uniform he wore no longer carried authority. It marked only the position he had misused. As the military police guided him toward their vehicle, the scene shifted again, not with tension, but with clarity. The same roadside that had witnessed his control now held him in accountability. The balance had not been forced back into place. It had been restored precisely by a system that operated beyond his reach. And standing at the center of it all, Denise Walker remained exactly as she had been from the beginning. Calm, composed, and grounded in a level of authority that had never needed to be asserted, only revealed. As Officer Ryan Mitchell was guided away, the tension that had once defined the roadside began to dissolve, slowly, almost cautiously, like a storm receding beyond the horizon. The flashing lights no longer dominated the scene. Their reflections softened against the pavement, blending back into the quiet rhythm of the suburban street. Military Police Captain Laura Briggs stepped aside, her presence still authoritative, but no longer central. The situation had been resolved. Order had returned. Colonel Denise Walker stood where she had been, her posture upright, her composure unchanged, as if the events that had just unfolded had never disrupted her balance. One of the military officers approached her respectfully, his tone measured. "Ma'am, your vehicle is ready," he said. Denise gave a small nod, acknowledging without ceremony. She turned slightly, her movements smooth, controlled, her presence steady. Around her, the environment shifted. The few remaining bystanders who had witnessed everything lowered their phones, their expressions quieter now, more reflective than curious. The energy of the moment had changed, not tense, not chaotic, but aware. Officer Jake Sullivan remained near the patrol car, his posture still, his gaze lowered briefly before lifting again toward Denise. He did not speak. He did not need to. The weight of what had occurred had already settled into understanding. Denise walked toward her vehicle with measured steps, her pace unhurried, her presence grounded in the same calm authority she had carried from the beginning. As she reached the driver's door, she paused for a brief moment, her hand resting lightly against the handle, her gaze lifting slightly as if taking in the space one final time. Then she opened the door and stepped inside, her movements precise, deliberate. The engine started with a soft hum, a sound that felt almost restorative against the fading echoes of the confrontation. Behind her, the military vehicles began to clear the scene, their movements efficient, controlled, their purpose complete. The street returned to its natural rhythm. Cars passing, distant sounds blending back into the background, the ordinary reclaiming its place. And as Colonel Denise Walker drove away, her posture steady, her presence unchanged, the moment settled into something lasting, not as chaos, but as clarity. A quiet, undeniable reminder that true authority does not need to announce itself, and that when justice arrives, it does so with a precision that restores balance without ever raising its voice. What lingers in this story is not the authority that arrived, but the quiet discipline that was present from the beginning. Colonel Walker never needed to prove who she was in the moment, because her strength was never tied to the situation unfolding in front of her. Officer Mitchell, on the other hand, relied entirely on the immediacy of control, on the belief that authority exists in the moment it is asserted. But what this moment revealed is that true authority is not reactive. It is structured. It does not depend on being louder, faster, or more forceful. It depends on knowing exactly where its boundaries are and choosing not to cross them. Mitchell did not lose his position because someone challenged him. He lost it because he acted without understanding the limits of his own power. And when those limits are ignored, consequences do not arrive as chaos. They arrive as correction, precise and undeniable. This story reminds us that power, when misused, does not collapse dramatically. It simply gives way to something stronger that was already in place. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.